So if I can sum up briefly, I think we have had some illuminating insights from these powerful teams who were discussing this issue the whole afternoon. First of all, you heard from the first presentation that arising from personal doubts, the speaker himself was persuaded that there is in fact a value to reintroduction, that it can present a continuum from captivity through the semi-wild, where the process, where support can be levered by tourism and so on, into a condition where there are free living and reproducing communities, which is reaching the state of conservation. He outlined some of the constraints there, that it was necessary to demonstrate that wild breeding has occurred and is successful. It was necessary in the second stage to ensure that the funds gained, the funds leveraged from the community and from governments, did in fact go into conservation and to the creation of or protection of habitat for orangutans. And there was a certain constraint that both disease condition, health of the animals and their behavior need monitoring. These things need to be kept in mind. But you saw that here was a convincing argument that rehabilitation does have a part to play in the conservation of orangutans. Developing from that, you had on the second group a discussion of the constraints of where should these animals be introduced to. Suitable habitat is essential. And in order to identify suitable habitat, competent land use planning is required. It was argued that the rigorous pre-assessment is necessary and that subsequent monitoring is also essential, and that the objective of long-term sustainability, that is to say the conservation of the habitat and the orangutans in it, must be the final objective. Plans have to be positively managed, have to be transparent, but that under these circumstances, rehabilitation, again, can be addressed as a positive element in the conservation armory, and reintroduction does offer exciting prospects. The issue of non-protected habitats is very important, and that starts a new line of thought. It is enlightening to be told that overall 60% of the surviving orangutans live in non-protected habitat at the moment, and that the old policies of trying to set aside tracts up to, say, 10% of the land surface area of a state or province of pristine habitat, that this is not an effective conservation method for orangutans, although with the proviso that in Sarawak it does seem to have been successful. But we have to admit that in Sarawak there were already large areas which, within historic times, have not in fact been occupied by orangutan. The land use management, again, was stressed as being a key issue. Land use policy was stressed, again, as being a key issue, that it is important to be prepared and to identify land that is suitable for protection. Then the implementation, public participation, regrettably high level of apathy was recorded by the speaker himself. But that in part this reflects the problems of the local communities who are affected and who themselves seek a sustainable livelihood and need to be assisted in this. The value of corridors was mentioned, and basically the emphasis was placed on a science base, looking for to provide the information to support a symbiosis between land-based industries and conservation. It was argued that the roundtable on sustainable oil palm should be pressurized in order to play a stronger part. Plantations themselves, though, need the skills to identify and to overcome the constraints and conflicts. And companies need to have capacity built. The fourth speaker spoke about oil palm, which is now recognized as the primary threat to orangutans and the primary source of orangutans coming into captivity. Recognized the obligations of these oil palms, which may be commercial or legal, maybe community-based, and also the obligations that they have occurred with the provider of the land, which is essentially the state. Recognized the conflicts, and again recognized that there are conflicts in land use boundaries, and they also recognized that there is a lack of capacity to undertake some of these investigations. There's a lack of maps that show the distribution of high conservation value lands across these states. And only members of the Round Table on sustainable oil palm have the knowledge, this knowledge. So that high conservation areas of high conservation value need to be defined, and they need to be integrated into land use plans. So here again, the pressure needs to be put both on the association of the oil palm organization, which is the Round Table. Pressure needs to be on plantations. Capacity needs to be built up in the companies, and that overall land use planning is a major issue, and habitat conservation must be the ultimate target. So these were the points that were raised by your round tables, and I think they give us quite a lot to think about in relation to your first reaction to the vote. But now, by the timetable, we have quite a long time when the timetable gives us a scope to ask for contributions from the floor. I think that World Land Trust people are around with roving microphones. It will be helpful if you wish to speak from the floor, if you could identify yourself, please, and certainly try to constrain yourself to 5 minutes of intervention. We'll see how that goes. If you want to address a question to the panelists who haven't moved, luckily, you may do so, but they have shot their bolt. They have spoken for their groups, and they are not sitting there in a questioning mode, and if they now wish to vacate the table, they can do so. Otherwise, you tend to look as if you are being targeted. This is not a targeted question and answer session. This is where we are asking for your contribution to the debate. And then, ultimately, we will have another vote at around about 8:45. So could I please have the first person who would like to contribute towards this debate in the light of what you have just heard? Okay, please. Okay, you wait for the microphone, and if you could just identify yourself.
Hello, my name's Rosie McDonnell, and I'm just generally interested. I think you can't really answer the question. I think in the long term, it's obviously of prime importance to conserve habitat. But in the short term and in practical terms, there are several hundred displaced orangutans. And I wonder what the options are for those if they're not rehabilitated.
I think, if I may say so, that there are several thousands. Several thousands is the answer to that question. Would anyone like to answer Rosie's question, please? What do you think should happen to them? I'm ignoring people who were on the panels for the moment, but I'll give them a chance. Anyone from the floor who would like to contribute? Well, I've just told you. Your neighbor on the right can put her hand up first, please, then. Have a microphone. Yeah. Well, if you're not allowed to either.
I'm not allowed to. He doesn't want you to talk. We discussed this in our group. If we're not to rehabilitate these orangutans and release them, then the only other choices that we have are to euthanize them. Euthanize there's probably about 1,500 orangutans in rescue centers in Kalimantan, Sarawak, Sabah, and Sumatra, 1,500 orangutans. The other choice would be to dump them into a forest with no orangutans to survive or not survive, regardless of their skill level or suitability for that. And the third, obviously, is to proceed with the process of rehabilitation and reintroduction.
So,
that's my view.
As was said in the preliminary discussions, this is a very important welfare issue. And it's not only that there may be 1,500 already in rescue centres, but there are more coming in as forests get cleared for further plantation, as we also heard. And again, how many are there in zoos? Does anybody know how many orangutans there are in zoos? How many? 2,000 worldwide? Yeah? And those zoos are probably proud of breeding them. So there's a serious welfare issue here which must concern us all. Would you like to contribute then?
Thank you. My name is Susan Chain. I'm from the Orangutan Tropical Peatland Project, and we work in central Kalimantan in Borneo. I have a personal contribution to the non-protected area debate. The palm oil industry and the palm oil expansion is of enormous importance and problematic to the orangutan habitat. However, the area that we work in is deep peat swamp forest, and actually at the moment the major threat to the peat swamp forest that we work in is not at the moment palm oil, although this is very important. It is the drying out and the burning of these forests. This year alone, we spent about 2 months where the airports were closed, the visibility was down to about 10 meters. 2006 was a very bad burning year, as was 2002, as was 1997-98. These dry seasons and the burning and the problem is becoming of increasing importance. The carbon being released into the atmosphere is a problem. So we must not lose sight of the fact that palm oil is not the only threat to these animals. The habitat degradation takes many forms, and fire is a big problem.
Could I ask a question? Peat does not burn unless it is drained. Therefore, the drainage of these peats is a positive action that is occurring. The drainage of these peats has an objective. That is the objective of planting something.
The drainage in the particular areas where we are working, there were 2 sites. One was cleared as a potential rice bowl for Indonesia. It was peat soil, it was acidic, it was never going to grow, and the canals were built for irrigation. In the remaining standing forest on the opposite side of the river, the canals are dug to extract selectively logged timber for the illegal trade. So yes, peat as a natural habitat would not burn. However, these canals have been dug. They are draining the peat, and this is creating a big problem.
So here again you have an emphasis on land use planning. Land use planning is not wholly for forest conservation and not necessarily for habitat conservation. Here is an instance in central Kalimantan which is contains enormous deposits of peat. Here is an instance where other land use, and probably unofficial land use, probably privately organized land use is occurring, and the fact that this land is being drained wholly unsuitably for rice, and the acidity of peat is unsuitable for rice, just as the highly sulfurous level of the soil is also unsuitable for rice. So that is a very unfortunate land use choice, and the alternative is access into the peat swamp forest, which is a preliminary to logging it. Access does not need to be actually by drainage ditch. Peat swamps have been accessed by that, but here is a land use issue that is not orangutan based. Another answer, Professor Chivers. Do you still want to speak?
Well, all right, sir. For years, I won't say how many years, I've believed in the protection of habitat. But over these years, seeing the failure to protect habitat, seeing the desperate situation into which orangutans have subsided, I'm sort of totally converted to the role of rehabilitation and reintroduction. I've been involved in various projects defining the science of rehabilitation and reintroduction. I believe it is successful. I can recount Willie Smith's encounters with individuals that he released 7 years before, that he met with babies, showing their breeding as well. And I'm sure as we collect this information, we will prove how successful it is. It starts as a welfare issue. It goes to a conservation issue if we follow it through logically and seriously. It makes the numbers of animals involved, the contribution to the gene pool is not something to be neglected, to be ignored. And so I urge you to vote in favour of the motion.
Very, very parliamentary. So that's good. So what we have heard, incidentally, I draw your attention to, we have heard that there are probably 1,500 orangutans in rehabilitation centres. There are probably 2,000 in zoos. The wild population of Borneo Kalimantan, I believe, is around about 11,000. Is somebody going to correct me on that? Sorry? 11,000 in Sabah. 35 to 40,000 in all of Borneo. In Sumatra, who knows? 6,000 in Sumatra. So that is, I think those statistics are useful things to bear in mind. Would anyone like to contribute from the floor, please? You. Wait a minute. Thank you.
My name's Jeff Kersey. It's just an observation. Have I missed something? Where's the debate? The first chap hit the nail on the head. It's a continuum. I think all those people that were involved in the workshops could easily work together to a common aim. So guys, just crack on and do it.
Yeah, please. Thank you for that.
Okay, my name is Laura Dorothy and I work at the Orang-utan Tropical Peatland Project as well. I think one of the key issues is money. That's it. Money goes to conservation and money goes to rehabilitation, and unfortunately the balance between the two is nowhere near met. As a researcher working in an orangutan project, the budget we work on, I think, unfortunately, due to the immediate demands of rehabilitation, is about a tenth, maybe, or even less than what rehabilitation works on. And that's the key issue, I think, here. And that's why the debate exists.
Okay, so what you're saying is that rehabilitation through charitable donations and presumably through government grants attracts about 90% of the available funding and 10% of the funding. But what is your research? What sort of research are you doing? Sorry? You have to have the speaker.
Yeah, wild orangutan research rather than...
Into behavior or what?
Behavior, yeah, and also orangutan population dynamics and stuff.
Yes. Another contribution, please. Yeah. At the end there. Oh, who have you given it to? Yeah, that's right.
Hi, my name's Graham Baines. I'm from the Department of Biological Anthropology at the University of Cambridge. And I just wanted to distinguish between reintroduction and rehabilitation, because the motion is about reintroduction, which of course can be very valuable for conservation if you're putting an orangutan back into the forest. But before this, preceding this, is this whole notion of rehabilitation. You have to have these whole facilities to rehabilitate orangutans. You have to feed them. You have to educate them on how to survive in the forest. You need enormous facilities to do this with lots of land, and these cost lots of money. And ultimately, is that rehabilitation? Is this reintroduction, or is it welfare? And I think David said this, perhaps it starts as a welfare issue and is conservation, but surely it costs a lot more to rehabilitate the orangutans than it does to reintroduce them. An enormous amount of money. And the problem as well is funding the centers. So the Orangutan Care Center and Quarantine Facility in Pangkalan Bun, which is operated by the Orang-utan Foundation International, was built for 40 orangutans initially. And now it's home to 330 orangutans, and they're trying to rehabilitate these, and they're trying to get them back, but it costs so much money before you can do it. So I think, even with limited funding available, is rehabilitation and reintroduction of captive orangutans as important, not just reintroduction.
Yes, I believe that is the motion, actually. No, it's not. Okay. So I would be very happy to say that the intention of the motion was to include rehabilitation and reintroduction, because would you agree that rehabilitation, as our first group of people, I think, came to conclusion, was rehabilitation must lead to reintroduction if it is to have any purpose? The rehabilitation is not just keeping large numbers of orangutans forever in captivity in the zoos. It must have a conservation purpose, and that was the point made by the thing. So I think that rehabilitation leading to the reintroduction of captive orangutans is what we are talking about, because these do go together. You're right to point out that they are two activities, but I'm not sure that you would necessarily be supported by saying that reintroduction of itself is cheaper than rehabilitation, because it is not going to happen without the second does not happen without the first. Anyone else like to contribute? Please. A microphone is coming.
Okay, thank you. May I contribute to the...
Just identify yourself, please,
okay.
to benefit people.
My name's Ray Heaton. I'm affiliated to a number of conservation groups. I'd like to comment on what was just said about the last point and also ask a question, if I may. My understanding is that a lot of orangs taken into care are straight from the wild. Some of them are adult. And I also believe that where these have been reintroduced, that a minimal rehabilitation has been necessary. So the rehabilitation, whilst very, very important as a precursor to reintroduction, is perhaps not quite the huge issue that it might seem. I hope I'm right on that one, but that's my understanding.
Well, shall we ask, first of all, we will ask our contingent from Sarawak, how many of the orangutans which come into rehabilitation in your hands are very recent captives and can be reintroduced quite quickly into new habitat? Give him a microphone, please.
Thank you. We have, in fact, very few recruits now. This year we have only 2 individuals that come in, surrendered by people. This, in fact, to us is reflections of the effectiveness of our conservation on the ground. Public awareness is very important to us, so that is the focus. And we believe that when there is no more recruit, there will not be actual rehabilitation work. We are moving to another level that is called managing semi-wild populations. So those that we have, that goes through our rehabilitation program, and we monitor them, are mostly very successful. They manage to live as semi-wild and breed in the wild. Thank you.
Prof. Bungaran, do you have a statistic for how many orangutan come into your Indonesian center that are very recent captives and can be released to the wild without difficulty?
Yes. We have a few orangutan came to our center, but most of them are the big one. So we don't need to rehabilitate them, but we translocate them. So as soon as we capture, send to our center, and then we immediately send it to the forest, then adjustment will be easier for them rather than we keep them with us. Because if we keep them too long, they become too much dependent to us, and it's become more and more difficult to send it back to the forest. Well, we have maybe for this year about 35 we did translocations.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Does anyone else who is concerned with rehabilitation centers want to contribute on this, answer this question? Yes, please.
At Narramenting, we tend to classify the wild orangutan that comes in temporarily or indeed doesn't come in at all. We pick them up in the field and we deliver them to another safe forest as translocations, and we don't classify them as rehabilitation or reintroductions. They're called translocations, and I think that's separate from this discussion. They don't cost so much as the rehabilitation process. So I think for the purposes of the argument, we're talking about orangutans that require rehabilitation, a lengthy and costly rehabilitation process before they could be reintroduced and with any sense that they have a chance of surviving. And to the question about cost, a couple of questions. It's going to cost quite a bit more to secure large amounts of land for orangutans, whether they're existing in that land already or for the release of orangutans. yes, rehabilitation is costly and it's a bit of a bottomless pit, but if we can get them out, those costs should go down, and if we can protect the habitat, those costs will go down. And again, there is money being dedicated towards rehabilitation. There are people that perhaps are concerned about welfare. They are giving to rehabilitation. They may have a concern about conservation and look forward to their return to the wild. But I wonder if any of the organizations that are trying to conserve habitat have been told by the donors they've approached that no, they won't give them any money for habitat because they'd rather give it to rehab. Is there really a conflict? Or is there a limitation to the funds that are out there that means that there's not enough money for habitat conservation?
Okay, thank you. So I'll come back to Ray, because the first, you've had an answer to your question that effectively those who are involved in this do not count translocation. They rapidly translocate competent adult orangutans that come into their hands. Could you give him back a microphone, because there was a second part of his question. And so therefore they have not been discussing that issue. And it is a small, not in Sarawak insignificant, but in Kalimantan it is a more significant number.
Thank you for that. I really feel that if we don't do something positive with all these orangs, then it sends out a very, very poor message to conservation in general, particularly to orang conservation. If these animals are not put back into the wild, then no attempt is made or no plans are made to reintroduce them. So I'm very much in favour of the motion. I really feel, too, that we want to preserve populations and genetic processes. And I don't remember any of the speakers commenting on this one, but I feel where orangs are from a particular population, you know, we have a number of subpopulations out in Borneo, we have speciation and so on, that the orangs should perhaps, in the screening before release, in the pre-release work, it should be established exactly which area they fit into. I know orangs are usually captured in the area where they were from, but there can be a considerable amount of movement into sanctuaries and into centres. And I feel the genetic origins of the animals are important, and it's important to try not to mix up populations that are naturally separated, because even where they might be, say, either side of a river, for example, because I think to conserve the genetic processes that are going on in these animals, if we have the numbers to do that, then this really is most important.
Thank you for that observation. Anyone want to continue the debate? Please. At the back.
Hi, I'm Jo Challans, just a member of the public. I just wondered what the cost was of rehabilitating a baby orangutan.
Has anybody worked out the per capita cost? Yes, again? Eric, you can speak this time then. Are you going to speak on the per capita cost? Yeah? Go on then, your turn.
Eric Meijers from the Orangutan Conservation Services Program. I was going to follow up on a couple of questions that had that same issue. For a start, I don't know whether there's a real trade-off between funding spent on reintroduction, rehabilitation, and funding spent on habitat conservation. I don't know whether there's donors that specifically say we want to do this or we want to do that. I assume there is, and there's certainly going to be an area of overlap. But I think it's important to get some numbers on the table. And just to give you some picture, keeping an orangutan in a rehabilitation center is at the cost, and correct me if I'm wrong, of about $2,000 per year. Depending on the age of the animal when they come in, they probably don't get released until an age of minimal 7 years. Is that about correct? So we're talking about at least several years of presence in one of the centers. The actual cost of release comes to about $5,000 per orangutan. So I don't know what it's going to be on an average orangutan. There's orangutans that are released very quickly. There's orangutans that stay there for many years, but probably a cost of minimal $10,000 to $15,000 per orangutan is probably a reasonable estimate for getting one orangutan back into the wild. And then we don't know what the actual mortality rates are yet for these animals. So it's not actually a certainty that these animals are going to survive. If I look at some of the programs where I've worked in actual habitat conservation, And these are not areas that we actually bought up. These were areas that were given by the government to us. So there's no acquisition costs. The actual management fees per hectare come to about $4 per hectare. So if you calculate that back to the orangutan densities in these areas, you have an annual cost per orangutan in the wild of about $200 to $300 per orangutan. So you have $15,000 per orangutan to get them into the wild, or an annual management cost per orangutan to keep them well protected in the wild. And I think that's kind of the difference what we're playing with.
Biggish sums. Wilfred.
If I'm not mistaken, the question was how much does it cost to upkeep a baby orangutan, is it? In rehabilitation center? Is that a question just now? All right. In Sarawak, we have 2 rehabilitation centers, and the average cost of keeping an orangutan in the rehabilitation center, where they are given supplementary feeding, is in ringgit Malaysia about 1,005. So conversely to pounds, that would be about 300 over pounds a month per individual. Thank you.
That points to the higher cost of living in Malaysia compared to Indonesia rather clearly. Yes, please, there.
Thank you. My name's Keith McIntosh. Just the obvious follow-up question to that. For $10,000, $15,000, what can be achieved in terms of habitat preservation or recovery? So for the equivalent of kind of one life cycle of a baby orangutan through the rehabilitation program.
I think Eric told you that it costs $200 per orangutan per annum in the wild in a conservation habitat. What more do you want to know?
For example, land protection, perhaps even expansion of some areas of forest.
By land purchase and so on?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what land price varies all over the place, but who has experience of land purchase? Have you had experience of land purchase?
Not really.
But
I can still answer it. My name is Vincent Nyman, Oxford Brookes University. I think Eric's point is very good. The only difference is that if you have, let's say, 15,000 or 20,000 pounds to spend, if you give it to a rehabilitation center, you can rename the orangutan perhaps, or you know to whom it goes, and you more or less are guaranteed that your money is being spent on what you think it's going to be spent. If you have $20,000 or $200,000 to spend in Indonesia, you may be lucky, and then the forest gets protected. You may be lucky for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but in year 5 there will be a fire, and the whole thing is gone. So I think if you want to have an investment where you know what you get back for your money, go for a rescue center. If you're a bit of a gambler, go for the forest. But again, my experience is mainly in Indonesia. Things may be different in Sabah and Sarawak.
Okay, hand up there. Cassie, is it you?
My name's Kirsty Burgess. I'm the Programmes Manager for the World Land Trust. One of the projects we've been looking at in Sabah is to actually purchase land to connect protected habitats. As I recall, last time I was there, 15,000 Malaysian ringgit would buy an acre of habitat in a prime conservation spot for orangutans. I'm not sure in the figures of how many orangutans that area would support, but by purchasing the land, you are securing that area for in perpetuity. And yes, there's management costs on top of that, but that will connect protected areas and be of great benefit to that population as well.
For those of quick mathematical minds, the Malaysian ringgit at present stands at about 5.35 to the pound. At least it did a week or so ago. Anyone else wish to contribute? Okay, come on then.
Yeah, Mark Anconas, I'm working in Sabah for the Kalimantan Orang-utan Conservation Project. I would like to just add a little bit on what Vincent just said. It's not really a gambling. When you buy land, you can design a mechanism through which this land is secured forever. So you invest 15,000 US, depending on where you are working, you can get a few acres to a couple of hectares. And this is a land you are securing not only for orangutans, but for other kind of species. And this is forever.
Okay, you had a hand up.
I'm Felicity and I've been an orangutan keeper for 20 years, but I'm very much on the no side of the argument. But I did want to say one thing, because this word rehabilitation, many of these orangs that you're talking about that cost an awful lot of money, it's not a matter of them being rehabilitated in welfare, it's a matter of them being brought up. Their babies that have been, their parents or mother has been killed in whatever environment. So it's really a different level of responsibility than just rehabilitation. So the feeling that I have is that we really do need to get back to more of a balance of money, because if we do not have the companion research on the wild, which we really don't have, we don't have a concept of what wild orangutan culture is, and we're losing that opportunity. So that it's really, whereas the responsibility for bringing up orangutans in rescue centers is one thing, but it doesn't replace being raised within their own environment. And so I really argue for more of a balance towards the land and wild orangutan culture being preserved.
I think that's a very important point, because the orangutan is a higher primate, and a great deal of what an adult orangutan knows, it learned through its parents by teaching. There's a long childhood, and this is undoubtedly very important, particularly in a wild locality. And in a cage, they learn only that papayas, sweet potatoes, and bananas are the things that you eat, which is not helpful in the wild.
No, I'm sorry, sir. The rehabilitation. Where's Rondang? Slipped off. I mean, the rehabilitation process involves acclimatizing them to abilities to move independently, to find the right foods, and to interact socially to an appropriate extent. It is not just giving them commercial fruit from the market, if it is done properly, as it is at Wana Reset and Nyaru Menteng. A tremendous amount of effort into training them to be like wild orangutans. And we know enough about wild orangutan behavior. I got the impression that there was a suggestion that not enough studies of wild orangutans have been done. They have, and I'm involved with people who are doing studies of wild orangutans, as well as in the rehabilitation, reintroduction process. So, you know, I urge you to vote in favour of the motion.
Okay, come on then.
Thank you. My name is Andy Tate. I work for Greenpeace. I spend a lot of my time looking at the drivers of deforestation in Indonesia. And I keep looking at the motion, and I think the problem is actually the motion is flawed, because it makes a certain basic assumption which doesn't play out in reality. I wish it did, but unfortunately it doesn't. The assumption is that if reintroduction suggests that there is always going to be land available for that reintroduction to take place, the reality, unfortunately, is that the threats from conversion industries, primarily palm oil, also pulp and paper, are meaning that in certain areas land is rapidly running out. Probably the best current example of that is in Sumatra, where one area that has been used for reintroduction is now under threat from one particular pulp and paper company, Sinarmas/APP, who have concession areas now for where that reintroduction area is. It's only a matter of time, if current conversion policies continue in Indonesia, that other areas are going to come under that similar threat as well. So essentially, I think that I'm, surprisingly enough, going to vote no for the motion. But I think essentially what needs to happen is that we need to get as much forest off limits to future conversion in Indonesia. That means changing the dynamics of the pulp and paper and palm oil industries, pressing those industries into working on existing plantation areas, focusing on yield improvements, and expanding only into degraded areas. Now, we as consumers can play some role in that through pressuring the companies, multinational brand companies, who are buying palm oil products or products from pulp and paper from Indonesia. Big multinational brands like Nestle still buy palm oil from companies involved in forest destruction. Other companies, Procter & Gamble, Unilever and other, they're all involved. Some of them are actually trying to buy palm oil from members of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, which is a start. But unfortunately, members of that roundtable are still involved in forest destruction. So we have a long way to go yet before we get to the place we need to get to conserve orangutans in the wild.
Well, thank you for that. We were trying to break through that syndrome. Please, another contribution here.
Just got a question. You've got a very assorted group of NGOs with very different agendas here. And the one word that keeps coming up is money. And there seems to be this triage type mentality and scarcity ideology among everybody. Instead of talking about, well, we need to raise X hundred million to do this, it's, well, what we can do and what we can't do. I just wondering if anyone can give me an answer. You know, if I could write a check for an unlimited amount of money this evening, what would it actually cost with the number of orangutans that there are to rehabilitate them, conserve them, buy up the land? Is there any sort of, is it $10 million, $100 million, $1 billion? You know, bribe every government official that's necessary, change the laws, put your own politicians in power. I mean, what is the actual number that we're talking about, that everyone's scribbling about?
Well, shall I try to summarize the numbers that I've got down here? We've got 1,500 orangutan in rehabilitation. We have been given a figure of about 15,000 US in order to run the process through to release in the wild, and a subsequent maintenance cost of 200 US per annum, and a price of around about, I'm trying to convert that into US dollars, around about 4,500 US dollars per acre or hectare, Kirsty? Okay, so that's 10,000 US dollars per hectare. So there are some figures for you. If you're a quick mathematician, you can answer your own question. You should listen. I've been listening to you. You come up afterwards and I'll repeat those figures for you, please. Okay. 1,500 orangutans, we were told at the beginning, are in rehabilitation. I beg your pardon? In the wild, we were told there are 35,000 in Borneo and 6,000 in Sumatra. Okay, Eric.
This is very rough estimates, but I've been toying with the opportunity cost of protecting orangutans if you assume that the alternative is to develop orangutan habitat into oil palm plantations. And on a time span of developing oil palm for like 20 years to save these orangutans, you'd be looking at, really this is very rough, but between $250,000 and $500,000 per orangutan to actually offset the opportunity cost for oil palm development. And that number being so high indicates why we're so, it's part of the indication why we're relatively useless in preventing these oil palm companies going in, because there is so much more money to be made by destroying the habitat than we can gain from keeping it at the moment. And there's other considerations there. We're trying to generate funding through environmental services and carbon, but as long as these markets don't kick in, that's the simple calculation that we have to deal with.
Okay. Here, please. The lady in the blue jersey.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Leonard. I just wanted to know, I disagree with this motion because, I agree with the gentleman over there from Greenpeace and the lady behind me, because even when I was travelling in Sumatra over the summer, and even I spent 5 days sleeping in the jungle, and I was privileged to see the orangutans. But even as I was there, I could hear the forests being destroyed. So I do believe that we have to purchase the land, because land is running out. So it's all well and good saying that we need to look after these orangutans and then we'll put them somewhere else, but there will be a time where there is nowhere to put them. But what I wanted to know was, how easy is it to purchase this land? Because again, it's very easy to say, well, we'll buy this land, but surely the government in Indonesia would rather sell their land to corporations and make profit rather than give it for the good of the orangutan. So I just want to know, how easy is it to purchase land in Indonesia?
I wonder if anyone from the Indonesian embassy would like to cover the regulations that concerning the purchase of land by non-nationals.
You can buy land only maximum to 25 hectares for owning the land. But if you want to have bigger than that, then you must have only, you cannot buy it, but you just only kind of buy the right to use it. So there are right to use for forest, there are right to use for plantation also. So the right to use plantation and the forest production, it is not buying the land. It is buying the concession to use the land. So for forest land, for instance, our foundation now is going to buy, and not to buy the concession. The cost is $4 for 20 years. $4 for 20 years for the right to use the land. That's for the forest. But for plantation, maybe almost the same price also. It's only not buying the land, but also only to buy the right to use it. So the term also 20 years, but extendable for another 20, extendable again. But for forest, maybe it can be for 60 years. 60 years, extendable to 100 years. But the price still about $4 for 20 years.
$4 per hectare,
per hectare basis.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the answer, that the concessions are available in Indonesia, but for a designated land use, for 20, 25, and possibly up to 100 years. In Sarawak, I think in Sarawak it is not possible for foreigners to buy land? No. Not possible. Sabah?
Thank you. It's a matter of policy and lobbying with relevant partners. In Sabah, usually as a foreigner, you cannot buy land, but the thing is, recently the government decided to create a trust for conservation, and it becomes now possible to purchase land for conservation. This is just a matter of policy and lobbying with the proper people.
Okay, please.
Hi, my name is Nicola Abram, and I'm with DICE, the University of Kent. I think also we have to recognise that it's not just land purchase that is important. You know, there's other mechanisms that are there for conservation, such as payments for RED and other such payments for ecosystem services. So I think that should also be recognised, and also if you integrate that with community development, so that local people do get conservation buy-in, then that's going to be ultimately a long-term solution for conservation of not only orangutans but also other wildlife and important key habitats for the area as well.
Well, that touches on a very important point, which was discussed in our workshops, as I reported to you, but the involvement of local communities is obviously absolutely vital, and I'm sure that many people will agree with you. Anyone want to agree or disagree with her? The back, or you want to raise another subject?
Hello, my name is Johanna Rode. I'm doing the MSc in primate conservation at Oxford Brookes University. Maybe my question is slightly off topic, but I wondered how the rehabilitation centers are telling the people, the local people, that they spend like £300 for an orangutan per month, and the people around, maybe they don't have money to buy something.
Who would like to answer that question? Yes?
I can't specifically answer that for rehabilitation centers, but I do get asked the question a lot by people that we work with in local communities. Why do you bother with these orangutans? And we're the people that need it. Why do you spend so much money on these orangutans? Who are these orangutans anyway? And it's a question that I get so often asked. I get asked so often that I basically stay away from the whole subject of orangutans, and I try to talk on issues that are of importance to people, like forests in general, or we talk about fish, or we talk about clean rivers, or we talk about pigs, but we don't touch on orangutans because that question always comes back, and I think to a certain extent it's very justified.
Yes, but also there are some rehabilitation centres which are quite near to urban centres and are not in remote places, where, in fact, there is a very positive contribution for tourism. Would you like to say something about that?
Our Semongo Wildlife Center in Kuching has a semi-wild population of about 20 over orangutan. And up to this stage, although it is not self-sufficient in terms of funding, we do generate a sustainable amount of revenue every year, and close to about 300 visitors per day come to the center, and the collection from that center was put back to the rehabilitation of, not actually rehabilitation, but the management of the semi-wild orangutan in that center. So it has certain sustainable tourism values that it puts back, which we put it back into conservation as well.
Where do we move now? Right at the back then, why not? Give the girls something to do, run around.
Sorry, hi. I'm Anthony Murray. I work for Global Data that works on the analysis of renewable energies. And it's saddening to say, and probably a few people know this, but us as people and some of the ways that we can change individually into the broad terms of being greener and better for the world is diversifying our lifestyles into different things. One of them is by using more biofuels and biodiesels, certainly for cars and hybrid cars and so on. BP and Shell, for example, earlier on in the year cut out all of their budgets and operations within their operations in renewable energies, apart from their work in biodiesel and biofuels. However, the fastest growing use and material for biofuels and biodiesels, ironically, is palm oil. And so we have a massive wealth of material that we're actually destroying environment for, to actually better, for the more ignorant of us, which contains myself, in order to live more kind of green and better lives by using our cars for a material that actually, at an alarming, far more alarming rate than people realize, the deforestation and therefore the displacement of such a special species as orangutans. It's my personal opinion, albeit I'm not immediately involved in the conservation side, that the testing and testing the efficiency, so therefore the monitoring to see which processes are actually the most effective in terms of either the replacement, sorry if that's the wrong word, or the rescuing of orangutans, to see actually which is going to be more cost effective. And I say that simply because these costs are going to collectively, not per capita perhaps, but collectively going to be rising imminently. It's now known that large companies such as Shell, as Nestor Oil, for example, are only going to be able to sustainably produce palm oil sufficient for their biodiesel in about 5, 6, 7 years' time as a mean. So up until for the next, 5, 6, 7 years, there's going to be ever more unsustainable use of land that's going to be taken down for the use of palm oil, ironically, so that we can live greener lives. Anyway, thank you.
You have pinpointed an anomaly in our own lives and in our own legislation at the European and national level. Yeah. Next door to you, while the microphone is there.
Helen Gilbert. I'm an academic and I'm currently writing a cultural history of the orangutan reaching back to writings from the 17th century to the present. I've been kind of surprised that the question of the humanity of orangutans hasn't come up here yet tonight. As many of you will know, in the earlier days, there wasn't a clear species distinction between humans and animals, and even tonight we've heard people talking about the childhood of orangutans, and many of you will be aware of the Great Ape Debate and the involvement of people like Peter Singer and Pablo Cavalieri in that, and also the recognition of some European countries of rights for apes. And I wonder if, given these debates and the progressive recognition of the rights of animals, if we may not come to a point in the future, if we don't actively save the welfare cases, where we will be looked at as a generation that failed to observe the rights of the animals. So whilst I'm enormously concerned about habitat conservation, I would still maintain that we must do our best for the animals that have been removed from their habitat, and that the money should be spent on conserving and reintroducing this population.
Thank you for that contribution. Who has not spoken yet? Anyone who has got a hand up who has not yet spoken? Okay, yeah, please.
Jeannie Elford. I'd just like one of the speakers to tell me what effect the corruption that's endemic throughout the Indonesian government, what effect that has on habitat protection.
Probably a question that people will not want to answer at the moment. Anyone want to answer? Pak Bungaran, did you hear that? I'm sorry about that, but do you wish to say anything? 2 hours, yes. So there are people you could talk to. You could talk to afterwards. You've spoken enough. John, did you want to say something?
Lord Cranbrook asked the audience, the participants, about the problems of foreigners owning land. I'd like to make it very clear that the way the World Land Trust acts, the World Land Trust and its partners never have expatriates owning land. We only facilitate local NGOs to actually own the land in any country. And I think it's a very important distinction. One of the issues that came up in our discussions about the areas outside protected areas was that if you're going to acquire land for conservation outside a protected area, bearing in mind that 60% of the orangutans occur outside protected areas, surely the priority has to be to acquire land that has orangutans in it. The problem is, if you want to do rehabilitation and reintroduction, you need land that doesn't have orangutans, and therein lies the dilemma. We have limited funds. My view is those limited funds should be directed to the areas with the maximum biodiversity conservation value, which includes orangutans, which means you're not going to buy lands that don't have orangutans, which are the only lands suitable for reintroduction.
Another major paradox, Professor Bungaran.
Maybe I speak on a egoistical level because I have 900 orangutan to take care. So if you buy the land with only, there is orangutan there, so you cannot help us because we cannot release our orangutan to the forest which has orangutan already there. So because we can release our orangutan only to the forest which doesn't have any orangutan. So if you make that kind of statement, it means you can help us, whereas we need help. Otherwise, you see, what will be the world community tell to us? What will be the future generation tell to us? You see, you have the opportunity to help 900 orangutan, but you do not take the opportunity. Thank you very much.
So the dilemma is heightened. Any further contributions? We're drawing near to a close. Who would like to have last word, please?
My name is Mark Stanley Price, and I think it's very important that we realize that the purpose of reintroduction is not about the release of individuals, it's about the establishment of populations. And that hasn't really been touched on this evening. And I think the experts, and I'm not an orangutan expert, would say that the releases of animals are done when those individuals are ready, and quite frankly, once they're in the forest, very little is known about how they fare. They are not part of sustained, purposeful population establishments. And after what John has said, which I of course have to agree in one way, and not because I'm just on the Council of the World Land Trust, but the point is, there is unoccupied orang habitat in Borneo at the moment. Now, it may or may not be suitable for forestry, it may or not be suitable for palm oil, I don't know, but there is land available. And I think instead of conservation being on the defensive, which we are at the moment, we receive animals, what are we going to do with them? Let's go on the offensive. Let us say that with 1,500 animals, we can set up 2 or 3 viable populations. Now, it will take time because they're going to be a younger population than a natural age structure. There are all sorts of practical aspects to that. But over a period of years, there could be a very sensible, sustained approach in a new area to setting up new orangutan populations. And they will have to be properly prepared, obviously, and properly monitored, as we've come out of the workshop saying. But here is a fantastic opportunity. The established populations may not behave in the same way as the ancestral ones, but that doesn't matter. The world is changing. We cannot expect to rely on established protected areas. Let us go out, get new lands, let us experiment. We have a fantastic resource in these animals. We have the know-how. Let us get the money and try it. Thank you.
Right, so thank you very much for that. We have had, I think, a very good debate. I'm very grateful to those who have contributed to the floor in asking searching questions and in giving important opinions on the issue. So let us now just see how you fare in the final vote. So the vote is that even with limited funding available, and I've put in this word rehabilitation, rehabilitation and reintroduction of captive orangutans is as important for their conservation as habitat protection. Who now feels that this is correct? So, $47. Now, who feels that even with limited funding available, rehabilitation and reintroduction of captive orangutans is not as important for their conservation as habitat protection? I count in threes as I count sheep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We're well over, all right? So that the final vote is actually unchanged, and there is still a majority that feels that funding priorities should go to conservation and habitat protection of orangutans in the wild. Nonetheless, there was a substantial minority vote for the other opinion. Thank you all very much indeed, and thank you for participating, and I leave you free to discuss the issue among yourselves for the remaining few minutes, because I'm tired of standing up.
On behalf of us all, I'd like to thank Lord Cranbrook very much indeed for chairing such an interesting and controversial area. It takes a lot of skill to chair a meeting like this, and I'm sure you all agree he's done a very, very good job, and the bar is now open for you to continue the discussions, and I'm sure they will go on. Thank you, Lord Cranbrook.